Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's regularly scheduled board meeting, June 8th, 2022. We'll go ahead and open up the meeting here and establish a quorum.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to mention that board members Seabury Nachbar and Carl Palestrini will not be joining us this evening. I'd like to also make mention that this meeting is being recorded and viewable later on YouTube. And agenda item C, 1C, can I please get a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion to adopt the agenda. So I second.
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
All right. And can Principal John Lyons join us in leading the Pledge of Allegiance? Crowd participation here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, John. All right. Moving along, agenda item 1E, ACT and CSCA comments. It looks like we do not have any comments from ACT or CSCA leadership this evening, so we'll move right along to agenda item F, and this is public comment on non-agendized. Oh, sorry. Sorry, it was just moving right along. Yeah, sorry. We'll do the Board of Education Roundtable, and we will start with Anne Marie.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to thank Laura Dunn for our visit. She invited me to go down to Carmelo and see where the new portables are going to be, the new how it's going to be situated, how the kids are going to be working, and with all the new preschool programs coming in. And it was delightful to see everyone there. There's so many faces that I recognize. And I love seeing the children. They're so happy. They were so close to graduation. They were all excited. And I did want to stay for library time. I just wanted to put that one out there. I would like to thank the anonymous donor who gave money to Team 2035 for the robotics competitions. This person wanted to have more time for their robot to be out in competitions. So I wanted to thank that person. Also, graduations and promotions. I made it out to Kashawa, down to Captain Cooper, Carmel Middle School, Carmel Valley High School, and then Carmel High School. And I don't know what to say. I started out with the little ones, and they're so special. They just are so excited about everything, and they get to ring the bell or run through the little archway. So it's all so much fun to see them. And then they get to the high school, and they're just so serious, and they're going on, and I'm just having little issues with everybody moving on. It's graduation time. What can I say? So that was the end of what I had done. Thank you.
So I got to attend Carmel Middle School's open house, which was fabulous. And I always love seeing all the teachers that come because they have so many students that are in the school. And then I've been down and out with COVID. So I missed it all last week, which was such a bummer and a disappointment. But John, I want to really thank you for tomorrow. They are doing a graduation for the 5 students that didn't get to walk with their class and the 1 board member that didn't get to be there. So I'm really, really thankful you're doing that. And I know the parents are too. I've gotten a couple people that have reached out and are just super grateful. So thank you. I know that's a huge effort. Even though it's small, it's still an event. So thank you, John, for doing that, and your team as well. So I'm looking forward to it. That's it.
All right, I will keep this brief. Would like to thank the Carmel Middle School staff for an incredible open house. I was there with Tess and with Ted and with obviously many others, and Carl Palestrini was there, and it was really fabulous. The energy and the excitement that was around this campus with all of the students and parents was just, it was an amazing evening. So really want to thank everybody who had a hand in that. I know it was no small effort to pull that off this year. And I just, like everybody else, just wanted to thank all of our staff and all of our principals for the amazing graduations that all happened last week. There was a lot going on last week, and I know we were all so proud to be able to be a part of those celebrations. So thank you for having us. Thank you for all the students for being so kind and so sweet, and the staff and the principals just couldn't have been better. So thanks for a wonderful week of graduations. It was fabulous.
All right. Similar to many of the board members, spent a lot of time last week at various open houses and graduations. It was great to get out and see our students and staff celebrated. John gave a wonderful speech at the high school graduation, but I think the highlight was sitting between Anne Marie and Carl at the middle school graduation and listening to them two talk about 100 years of history in Carmel. So the friendly rivalry and competition was great to listen to. But no, it's this time of year, as I've talked about before, is just, it's surreal. It's the celebrations, the traditions are what a lot of us look forward to. Another thing that happens this time of year is sometimes we say goodbye to people. And so you'll see Blaze in the back of the room there. I want to thank him for all of his work at the district office. He's really disappointed that this is the last LCAP he's going to get to present, but I'm so glad we're able to keep him in the district and get him back to his passion of working with students. Many of us are jealous that he had the courage to do what I think a lot of us would like to do, and that is just get back to kids full time. But we're going to miss him. As Blaze knows, he's the only person in my life I've ever met that can talk football as much as I can. So I might have to start off every morning out at the high school, but we're going to miss him. And then also want to thank Rick Lopez for his work. Rick Lopez, former principal at the high school. He's been our COVID coordinator this year, and I think he's wrapping up next week. And you know, COVID or the COVID mitigation strategies are a celebration for all of us. I think this year, there were times where you didn't even know we were still in the middle of a pandemic because our staff handled this so well. And a lot of that was due to his leadership. And so just want to thank him for everything he did for us, not only this year, but in his career.
Great. Thank you. I know on behalf of the board, we wish Blaze all the best on his new endeavor, and then Rick Lopez as well. Okay. Well, moving on to agenda item F. This is public comment on non-agendized open session and closed session items. This is where, if you're here to publicly address the board, we would like to hear from you for 3 minutes. So if you pulled a number or not, we'll go ahead and start public comment. So please approach the podium and you'll have 3 minutes if there's any public comment this evening. Sure.
Make sure you turn it on.
Yeah, okay. Great. I'm Larry Arthur. I live up in the Carmel Views, and I went to graduation for the first time in decades. And I really wanted to, in the kindest way possible, let everyone know that it was a very moving event. And Mr. Lyons, your presentation, your speech was wonderful, and brought back a lot of memories. And what really is special about that real estate is its location, the relationship it has with the surrounding topography, the views up on the Fish Ranch, and now Paula Corona Canyon has a very special meaning for me because my brother, who worked for the state of California as general counsel for the Natural Resources and Wildlife Committee, had a hand in creating funding to go ahead and extend Point Lobos and really to preserve this wonderful view that we all benefit from. Imagine coming to work and, you know, having this all around us. So I really want to thank everybody for that. And moving forward, you know, we just want to support careful decision making relative to any improvements in the district and their effect on constituents. And I was very happy to read about the advisory groups being formed, the student group, and I guess a future staff group that Ted announced. And I think it's really important to include area residents. I think having a input in a very constructive and very positive way from people who have diverse backgrounds, work experiences, and access to technology that could truly benefit the district. So we would encourage that. I would encourage that. And I think that the more people that can be made aware of a plan, the better chance that there'll be good supporters for the best possible plan. So that's it. But thanks so much, and I appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you so much. All right, is that it for public comment? Looks like that is. Okay. So moving on to agenda item 2, this is our consent calendar. This is where the board bundles a number of items and acts upon them together in one motion through the use of a consent calendar. Consent agenda items are routine items deemed to be non-controversial for which board discussion is not anticipated and for which the superintendent recommends approval. There will be no discussion of these items prior to vote unless any member of the Board of Education or the superintendent requests specific items to be removed for discussion.
I would like to make a recommendation that we pull item 2CC, the Community Human Services Contract. I have not been able to provide the information that is needed at this time for me to approve that. So if we could pull that item for discussion.
Great, thank you, Dr. Knight. May I please get a motion to pull agenda item 2CC off the consent calendar?
I make a motion to pull item 2CC off of the consent calendar.
Second?
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
All right, now may I please receive a motion to approve the consent calendar with agenda item 2CC removed?
I make a motion to approve the consent calendar with item 2CC removed.
Second?
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
All right, so now we will discuss agenda item 2CC. So I'd like to receive a motion to postpone action on this consent agenda item, not because it's not supported overall, but because I had actually asked for information that I was hoping to receive by this evening's meeting, and Community Human Services was not able to produce it. So may I please receive a motion to postpone action on agenda item 2CC?
I make a motion to postpone a discussion of item 2CC until further time when we have more information.
Second?
Board President Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Clerk Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Board Member Anne Marie Rosen.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, board members. I know that was clunky. So we'll move along to agenda item 3. These are our action, discussion, and information items. We'll start out with this evening. I guess I'll just, for the public's information and also for my fellow board members, tonight on our agenda, we have 3 public hearings. So the way the public hearings will work is for each public hearing, I will open the hearing, we'll hear the presentation by staff or a presenter. We will hear comments from the public and the Board of Education on that, and then we will go ahead and close the hearing. So we will be doing this 3 times this evening. So our first public hearing is the 2022-2023 fiscal year update to the 2021 through 2024 Local Control Accountability Plan, also known as LCAP, with Blaze.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the appreciation earlier. Poncho, I'm okay, perfect. I don't need the. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so wanted to get this to you tonight, and we'll go through this. This is a yearly occurrence where we go through our local control accountability plan and bring it to the board for a hearing. And so tonight, I want to just frame the LCAP a little bit. So in the first slide. Oh, you haven't opened the hearing. That's correct.
So I will publicly open the hearing and now pass it off to Blaze.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, to frame the LCAP, all California school districts are required to develop and adopt annually a 3-year LCAP. Each year they update part of that 3-year plan. We're in year 2 of a 3-year plan. The process itself combines both comprehensive strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, which is now we should be calling educational partner engagement. The terminology is changing at the state level. And then accountability and compliance, really to increase and improve services for low-income students, English learners, and foster youth, known collectively as unduplicated students. This is to give you a quick timeline of what we've been doing. The process it's year-round, but in February we began to get ready to push through to this year's LCAP. So we're evaluating in the fall what's happening, what's working, and then we begin to get together and go through our process in February. We open a community survey in February where we seek input from our partners. We began all of our engagement practices, our meetings, our site level meetings throughout February and March. We have administrative council. We began to meet almost weekly during this time and to begin to look at, what are we going to do? Where are we prioritizing? How is it working? And then by the 4th of April this year, we had this was our district-wide educational partners meeting. And so each site had created their own LCAP committee. Those committees worked on what they were doing in their school plans relative to the LCAP, what were their needs, what was going well. And then we all came together and we shared out with each other here in this library. It was a very fruitful meeting where we were able to hear from everyone across the district, each site, and parents and staff, and it was a great meeting. And that kind of our last input on finalizing the LCAP. Then in May, we've put the LCAP in front of all of the required groups to look at and get a consultation. And so all of those required groups are listed there in May, including our bargaining units. And we've done that through May, and then we come here for the hearing, and then the next meeting will be the approval meeting. And so that's kind of how it works each year. On the next slide, I'm just kind of showing what's included. Just die. I think I lost power. There we go. I'll just tell you next slide, Pancho. We're good. We only have a few. And so what's included in the actual LCAP packet that you have? There are 5 components. There is the budget overview for parents, which is the first piece you'll see in the packet that you were received. The second is the supplement to the annual update, which was the update to the update that we had to do, and we put that through in December. So that's included. And then our actual LCAP for this year, the green box here. And then our expenditure and action tables for this current LCAP. And then finally the instructions. So all of that leads to 82 pages on the PDF, and you can find your way through. I will quickly just give you a little information on the budget overview because I'm just sharing a general overview, but I want to give you a little information. Last year, we were required to spend out of our overall budget $650,000 towards increasing and improving services for our unduplicated students. We budgeted $1.1 million and we spent $1.3 million in that area. This year, we're required to spend based on, it's something called the minimum proportionality percentage. So it's a calculation of the required amount that we would have to spend on our unduplicated students. It's based on the number of students relative to our total population. About $925,000 we're required to spend this year. We've budgeted $2 million in this LCAP to help provide services for those students. So just to kind of give you context of the budget. And Yvonne will be talking about the budget in a greater detail later tonight, obviously. Next slide, Pancho. When you look at the LCAP itself, you received in the attachments, there's a plan summary that has general information. It talks about our successes and our challenges, and a brief plan highlight. Then there's a section on educational partner engagement. What did we learn from them? How was it considered? What did the groups tell us? So there's a summary of that feedback so you can really see what people were telling us in different groups. And then there's the goals and actions section. And this is where we have our broad goals, different actions, and our related metrics. Those all sit in the plan. And those metrics are to help us measure how we're doing on the broad goals using those actions. And then there's a section called Increase and Improve Services for our Unduplicated Students. And this is the part where we describe how those actions that we've put in there are intended to meet the needs of those students. And generally, because we're a small district, a lot of what we do is for everyone, but we design what we're doing to be directed for certain groups of students first. That's why we're doing it, and then other students benefit from it as well, because we're able to apply it across the whole district. But it's principally directive and effective for certain student subgroups. So that's kind of the point of a lot of when you see like district-wide or school-wide implementation in action, that's what it's usually about. And then the last slide, this is really a summary of where the actions are. So we have a whole section on assessment and intervention systems. So this is really about making sure we're finding kids when they need help, identifying what that is, and helping them. So there's a bunch there. And there are specific, obviously, when you look through the report more closely, you'll see specific funding that's going to, whether it's personnel or programs or what have you, tied to these kind of general areas. You'll see a lot of that as you go through. There's also increased support for English learners in this LCAP, and it's really mostly staffing at Carmel Middle, Carmel High School, and Captain Cooper, where we've provided more staffing to provide more support. And we're seeing great results from starting that last year at the middle school. There's a focus on early literacy and math, and so there's a bunch of training that we've been doing around structured literacy and really looking at foundational reading skills, and then also working towards improving math instruction in the district. And we've just adopted, as you know, this year, a new elementary math program and also a high school-based program for math 1, 2, and 3. And so there's been a lot of work around, providing, better instruction around math and better materials for math instruction. And then we have our extended learning opportunities. So this is our K through 8 summer programming, our programming for low-income students that we do in Cooper and Kashawa, and then also our programming that we do here for students who need extra help at the middle school that are for kids in elementary and middle school. And then also at the high school, where we're doing mostly credit recovery, but we have those programs are tied into this here. And then a big focus on wellness and students' mental health. And so this is a big chunk of what we have in the plan, and what people told us. This is what it was probably the top thing that we heard when we looked at surveys and listened to people, was that keep supporting students' mental health and their social emotional wellness, and to help develop these kids. And so we have a lot invested in mental health clinicians, social workers, our wellness centers, our behavioral staff, our social emotional learning programs. And then the professional development is aligned with all of that. So our professional development is around social emotional learning. It is around the early literacy instruction, and it's around intervention and an assessment. So that we're trying to align all of our learning around these other areas that were priorities. And then finally, and another thing that was pretty clear in the feedback and input, was we need to improve our communication with our bilingual families, with our Spanish-speaking families in our district, obviously. And so we're addressing that this year with the inclusion of a bilingual community liaison. So this is a part-time position. We're able to expand another position to make it whole with somebody who's really fabulous and is trained at the elementary, middle, high school, and college level. So they are a great resource for families to be able to help them through the educational journey. And so that's one of the things you'll see in our LCAP as well. And that's kind of a summary of the things you'll see in the LCAP. So I just wanted to present that, and then obviously open it for any discussion or questions.
Great, thank you, Blaze.
You're welcome.
So before we hear comments from the board on the presentation, I'll open it up to the public or our staff. If you have any questions on the LCAP, if you could approach the podium. Okay, seeing there's none, do we have any questions from the board? We'll start with you, Anne Marie.
I have a couple of just questions that just came up while I was thinking about this, so I apologize that you didn't know about it in advance. I like the focus on the wellness and mental health. I think that's wonderful, and we're working towards that that end more and more. The communications, in terms of just reaching out to the bilingual community, are we also reaching out to them on a cultural level, in addition to just on a linguistic level? Because sometimes there's certain aspects of school and social interactions that are very cultural based.
Yeah, and
That-
yes, and the person that we have working for us is culturally similar to the families that they're working with. So they
Okay.
understand the culture and are part of that culture.
Beautiful.
So,
That
yeah.
was my main question. Thank you very much.
okay.
Tess?
Let's see, I just wanted to reiterate some of the questions I'd asked ahead of time. So I think my biggest question, well, I have a couple. In the 2020-21 LCAP, in this presentation, 96.2% of the low-income students graduated, and I think it was 97.3 of the whole population
Yeah.
graduated. So my main question is, how are we serving those students beyond high school? And I know the response was that some kids we will offer a fifth year to,
Right.
but does that depend on their age? Or I'm just wondering, how are we helping these kids either get their GED or get the support they need to graduate?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's happening. John could maybe even chime in a little bit. A lot of that's happening at the high school level, where we're
Yeah.
actually the counselors are counseling students around their options and families, and then sometimes it moves over to Carmel Valley High School. In fact, I think the one student who created the 96, who didn't graduate and made that 96 point whatever percentage, because it was one student, they were a fifth year student at Carmel Valley High School who then did not graduate in the fifth year. And so when you're talking a small number, one student can skew a percentage pretty well. Our numbers are really good. It's a very small amount of students who don't graduate, although we did have a little uptick during COVID. We had quite a few kids transfer over to Carmel Valley High School from Carmel High, and we saw our grad rates drop a little bit because I think we had 15 students move over there, and most of them graduated, but we also saw that their A through G completion didn't. They weren't completed because they were able to actually skip a few requirements that they would have to have at the high school that would have kept them A through G. And so at the Carmel Valley High School, some of those requirements aren't there. They have a less credit requirement, so they could skip certain courses. And so our A through G percentage went down a little chunk, and it was really because we had this kind of a blip, right, in that COVID year of all those kids moving over and just wanting to get out of school. So yeah, there are services. It's more of a student services kind of question. I think Paul and others had been, it hasn't been something that's been in my office. I remember when Rick was here, they were doing a lot to keep in touch with graduates and survey and find out what they were doing and following up on them, but it's never been anything really in my office, so it's hard for me to really comment too much on that. But I think those are great questions to ask for us to bring to the new student services person we're bringing in and say, maybe this is an area we need to follow up on.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other question is, and you addressed it in your presentation about the LCFF monies not covering all the needs that we have.
Right.
And it sounds like we're budgeting more for that. But does the LCAP ever include the need for the CTE opportunities for some of our unduplicated students or other kids who struggle that might need another pathway?
So it could at some point include CT opportunities. We are working on CT opportunities as overall as a district. And so we've made the focus of our LCAP really the increasing and improving services piece. Because of our funding being different than ADA schools, we have a different requirement than others. Some districts, basically everything they do is in their LCAP. Their LCAP is their entire budget, is their entire operations. Because we're funded differently and our LCFF monies are different, we don't have to operate our LCAP that way, and it was not traditionally set up that way. So we had two plans going traditionally where we had our district goals and our LCAP, and we dovetailed them together. So our district goals had certain things that became part of our LCAP, but there were things that sat out of the LCAP in our district goals, like things like CTE and what have you. Now, with Ted working on a strategic plan for us to have, here's where we're going forward, we've kind of, when COVID stopped us from actually developing a new set of district goals outside of our LCAP, we kept the focus on keeping our schools open and really just hunkering down around our LCAP. I would imagine that in the next couple of years, we should see the LCAP probably widen a little bit to fit in whatever those priorities are that are identified in that strategic planning.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Ted, did you want to say anything before we close the hearing?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Blaze and Michelle for all their work on this. There's a lot of work that goes into the LCAP and a lot of work with Yvonne and her team, making sure they have the money to actually do this. And as Blaze explained, we get money for certain categories of kids, but we supplement with the general fund a ton to make sure every kid gets what they need. So, you know, as much as this is a summary, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. So just want to thank the team for that and all the feedback we got from staff and parents.
And I think I just want to say there's so much more going on than what's in our LCAP, as you guys know. So it doesn't capture everything and all the, you know, great things that are happening on our campuses and what we're doing for kids. So if it did, this would be more than an 80-page document, just so you know.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I will go ahead and close this hearing, and we'll move on to agenda item 3B. Thanks, Blaze. So agenda item 3B is another public hearing. This is the 2022-2023 fiscal year proposed budget. So we'll be hearing from Yvonne on this. So I will publicly open this hearing and pass it off to you, Yvonne.
On here. There we go. It's so loud. So with your board agenda for the public hearing, I did add, you know, my summary report of the large budget sheets to provide additional information, but I'll do a quick presentation here as well. It's working nicely. So this slide represents the expenditures of the general fund in the amount of $74 million, a little bit more than $74 million. On the left side is the general fund. The unrestricted dollars of $58.5 million can be used for any educational purpose. The restricted amount of $15.5 million may only be used for a specific purpose defined by the legislature or a granting agency. The other side of the slide shows the other special purpose funds of the district, which are projected to total $10.6 million. These funds can only also be used for specific purposes. So you'll see in there child development and also nutrition services as an example. So based on information from the County Assessor's Office, we are projecting a 7% increase in assessed value, and so that's reflected in our projections for revenue. Federal and state resources will decrease from the current year for the 22-23 fiscal year in the amount of $3 million. So when you compare the two, on the right-hand side is our projection for 21-22 estimated of where we'll end the year, and on the right side is the 22-23 budget. So you can see that there is a decrease in revenue, and that's primarily due to the COVID dollars not being renewed. So $3 million of federal and state dollars that the district has received in the past that will not be forthcoming. Okay. Oops, there we go. This slide illustrates how the district uses total general fund dollars in a graphical representation. Salaries and benefits make up 83.18% of our budget, with the other almost 17% used to support other operations of the district. So other than salaries and benefits, we purchase books, we pay for utilities, we send money to other funds that aren't quite self-sustaining, and that makes up another 17% of our district. Yeah, it's not, there we go. You have to probably point over there. We're required to provide a statement of reasons for excess reserve. It's a state required form. And so the state requires a 3% reserve for a district of our size, that we reserve 3% for economic uncertainties. And so this amounts to $2.2 million. I'll put this on 2 slides. And going on there, we also have an additional 2% of all general fund expenditures for economic uncertainty, and an additional basic aid reserve in the amount of $13.1 million. Because of the volatility of property tax and cash flow purposes, it's important for us to keep a pretty healthy reserve there. The district, as you know, you've heard me talk about this before, receives the majority of its cash twice a year, as opposed to a state-funded district that gets 1/12 of its money each month. And so we do have to watch our cash very carefully, and those extra reserves that the board has in board policy assists us in doing that. We also are reserving funds for future textbook adoptions, planned capital outlay improvement projects that the board had a resolution in March that we presented some projects that we're planning and are in the planning process or in the in-progress process at this point. Okay. So I provided a slide here on the May revise from, we get all of our information in January when the governor's budget comes out in January. The legislature is working actively between between January and May. And so I just highlighted some key things that would affect our district. There were a lot of things in the May revise, but the legislature and the governor will come to an agreement, and the state budget has to be signed by July 1st. So included is an expected, which was not in the January revised, was one-time amount of discretionary dollars, additional funding for ELOP, so expanded learning opportunities, that they're actually in the May revise. We knew about that in January or so, and they're actually going to increase that. Had some information today that that's still something that's still being figured out on the per pupil amount. Funding to continue 2 meals a day for every student, and the increase in STIRS and PERS is almost 5% between the two. And minimum wage will continue to increase through 2028. So those are the items that I picked out that I thought would be of interest. So I provided key dates that are important to the board. Our challenge in the business office is during most months of the year, we are working on 3 active budgets. And this is due to our audits and closing of the books and preparing for a new year budget. They all kind of coincide at different months in the year. Our next financial report will occur in August with a broad overview of the state enacted budget, and we're required to give you a 45-day update on that. Then in September, our unaudited actuals report for the current fiscal year, year close, will be presented. And finally, I want to conclude my presentation by thanking our fiscal services team for the excellent work that they do all year long. This budget that you see, that's $72 million and another $10 million in other funds, takes a lot of dedication from our staff. So I want to thank the fiscal services team for the excellent work they do all year long. And under the direction of Diana Gonzalez, our new Director of Fiscal Services, I believe that we have an incredible, dedicated team in our business office, and we're in good hands. I also wish to thank all of our school and department staff for their dedication to the budget process. This is not done in silos. It's done with lots of collaboration and conversation and part of the LCAP. So it's talked about a lot. It is through their collective efforts that a budget can be finalized for public hearing, and the budget, interestingly, reflects a financial story of how we support learning for all students in our district.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. It is not lost on the Board of Education how complicated and time-consuming and comprehensive what you're doing is. So thank you so much for that presentation. And personally, I love the way you present and the way you sort of distill it down. It makes it very easy for us, I think, to really understand it. So thank you for that presentation. And before I get to the Board of Education questions, is there any questions from staff or the public? Please make your way to the podium. Okay. Anne Marie, any questions?
I do have a question, and I don't know if you're best to answer this or if it's best for Ted to answer it, but I was looking over the budget, and the 100 and some odd pages is all exciting reading for me. But between the consent calendar and the budget, I noticed that we're spending $400,000 in legal services, and I was just wondering about if we could get a better breakdown as to how that was going to be, what it's going to, whether it's actually going to cases that go to court, whether they are, public records requests, whether they're part of CEQA, because we've got so much going on. And then I guess the next part of my question would be, we're kind of looking at putting, $400,000 out there. Is that going to be enough considering how much that we've got going on, with people threatening to sue us already, and we haven't even gotten to, CEQA being out there yet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can answer that. The $400,000 number that you're seeing is what we are estimating our legal costs will be for the next year. Just as an example, our most recent invoice for just 1 month was $81,000 in legal. So that money is not there in anticipation of a legal battle. It is there just for what our monthly costs have become in terms of legal. So when you look at that $81,000, your kind of normal day-to-day things that every district does is maybe $10,000, a few $1,000s for student issues. Maybe you've got a discipline issue with, an adult HR. That's probably $10,000. In just 1 month, we spent $15,000 on public records requests. So, and it's one of the reasons why we created a website to show our community how much money we are taking out of the classrooms for public records requests. I still have to believe that, the framers of sunshine laws did not anticipate this type of open records setting where we get asked the same questions over and over again every week. And they just cost us thousands of dollars. We have one person in our IT team who that's all he does is pull emails. Jessica and Tricia spend a lot of time, and then we have to send those to legal. I spent another $25,000 this month just on CEQA because we get emails from community members, and because a couple of those community members have threatened litigation, every time they send an email, I have to send it to legal and say, look into this. What can I say? What can't I say? And so when you look at our wanting to be transparent with our public and our wanting to have that relationship and give them the information they want, in 1 month, that was $40,000. Just because we're in a litigious environment. And so we have to make sure that our legal counsel is helping us with that. We also have various civil rights, OCR complaints that come in from time to time. Those can add up very quickly. But a bulk of our legal fees, which I've never seen to this degree, are requests that we're getting from community members for information. One of the requests we had on CEQA, we literally had to go back. I think Dan and Tricia had to go find pallets and boxes of stuff from 15 years ago, pay somebody to scan it in so that we could send it to a lawyer, when we all know that, this was 15 years ago and has no bearing on what we're doing today. So as much as I want to be transparent, as much as I want to help our community understand what we're doing, I have a responsibility to let our community know how much money is being taken out of the classroom. What I'm anticipating having to spend on CPRA requests and just being transparent with our community would probably give our staff another 1% raise or allow me to hire 3 teachers. But I can't. I have to keep that money back to pay our lawyers for this. So that's where we're at, and I want to make sure we're transparent about that.
Yeah, I was just looking at one of the budget items. I think that it was about what we're spending on, or anticipating spending on legal fees was about what we're going to be spending on textbook adoption for this next year for the whole entire K-12. And that's just incredible to me. And I was just wondering if we were going to be looking at some point in time for a breakdown from the public, so the public can see where this is going in terms of, is this going out to actual suits? Is this just going out to PRA requests? And if we break them down even further, just so people can see exactly what it's costing. us to do that, because it's taking us away from our job of being educators to now being, essentially, somebody's, the bank of such and such that we're going to give you a loan here, sue us and we'll give you money for it. That's ludicrous to me. And I think the public needs to know that, we're diverting funds from going directly into a classroom to go to somebody else.
You bet. We have recently asked our legal firm to start, billing us with more description. So instead of just saying, hey, your bill's $80,000, I now have a bill that says, $25,000 for CEQA, $15,000 for CPRA requests. So we're going to start attaching those to those requests. And most of the requests at this point we're getting now are anonymous. So we're getting anonymous emails that are costing us thousands and thousands of dollars. And we're quite honestly answering the same questions over and over again. And having to go find information that is just not readily available. So, it's a difficult situation, and I don't want to, we are literally talking about only a couple people. I do believe a super, super majority of our community want to partner with us. And they have good intentions, and they want to meet, and they want to just truly talk and know what's going on. But unfortunately, because of the behavior of a few, we've really had to pull back on that. When I do a presentation and one individual uses that information, twists it, and then sends a PRA request that costs us thousands of dollars, that makes me nervous to go out there and meet with that person. And I don't want to be gullible. And so I just want to be clear, a super, super majority of our parents are partnering with us in the right way, but this is truly from just a couple individuals in the community that are costing us this much money.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. And you thanked everybody else, but I want to personally thank you as well for all of you keep the team going, so thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions. So for the $8 billion, the one-time discretionary block grant for 2022-2023, that's estimated at $1,500 per ADA. Does that apply to us even though we're a basic aid district? And are there other grant monies or other monies that go towards ADA like that?
Mm-hmm.
That's normal? Okay.
Yes. The discretionary funds, the governor often will provide discretionary funds to school districts. They haven't in the past few years, but you see that often. If there's some extra money, they'll say, hey, we're going to give the schools some dollars. And often those discretionary funds are don't come with a lot of strings, so it's kind of nice. But they are one-time dollars, and so we should use them for only one-time purposes. In the past, I've always used one-time dollars for facilities. There's always facility needs, and it's a great use of one-time dollars like that. But and so it's not the same as categorical, but we also receive categorical funding from the state. The ELOP will be a type of a categorical program, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, different from Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant. I think you've heard me talk about that before. So that's one that they're still trying to finalize what will be the per pupil amount between the legislature and what the governor will eventually sign. And
so is that reflected in the budget currently? In the
it is not.
It is not. So that would be a bonus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that will be, but it's also is restricted in a specific purpose. It's that funding where we will be required to add 9-hour days, which we're already doing with our after school and before school programs, and also but extending those times at student summer school and maybe some of the off days like winter break, things like that we're still trying to figure out. When we have everybody on board, we will be actively figuring out how we're going to use those funds and support students.
Okay. And then my other question was, I know we've discussed the increases in STRS and PERS and how rapidly those have been going up. And I was curious to know if there's any legislation or anything at the state level that will help to offset some of those funds for school districts.
There's something that we're required to track called STRS on behalf, and the state does actually put some additional funding towards STRS. That's why it's called STRS on behalf. PERS, there isn't any additional funding. There there has been some relief in past years, and that relief is now going away. And so that's why we're seeing that STRS rate go up. The PERS rate is also going up, as you saw in my presentation. The governor has said, our advisors that kind of interpret what's in the law and what's coming out through the legislation, is that we should not expect it. So they provided a large COLA this year. Of course, we don't benefit from the COLA. We get our funding from our increase in property tax revenues. And so, but he says, because I've provided a large COLA, you should be able to compensate. That will compensate you for your increase in your retirement. Continues to be a huge concern for districts. It continues to go up. It looks like they are stabilizing the rates, but it's always subject to change, particularly for PERS. Mm-hmm.
I just have one question that I'll apologize that I didn't ask in advance, but it came to me while you were presenting. So, and okay. I don't think it's that intense, but I do want to just make a comment that I am thankful that you included this pie chart of the use of unrestricted and restricted general fund dollars, because I do believe there is the continued misconception that we have a $74 million budget, and all of that is funding that can go to our students, our teachers. I think it is widely unknown that 83% of that goes to salary and benefits. So thank you for calling that out in this presentation. I just think it's important for everybody to realize that a large chunk of the $74 million pie is actually going to salary and benefits. So thank you for that. And then my question was just regarding the COVID funding, the $3 million that you said was going away. So kind of two questions. One is, since most of the United States is experiencing an uptick in COVID, are there any discussions at the state level that some funding might come back to the local level? That's part one. And then part two is, with the $3 million going away, what are we losing? If it's contact tracers or whatever they may be, and are we making up for that in funds from the general funds? Sorry, I didn't ask that. It really didn't dawn on me until your presentation. So
that's okay.
Okay,
it's a good question. There is not talk right now. The talk has been that there will not be additional ESSER, American Rescue Plan Act, and through that act there was ESSER funds in three really large pots of money that came through ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. The state then also provided additional funding on top of that to mitigate learning loss. The ELOG grant that I talked about was for that purpose, to help schools reopen schools in a safe manner. There were grants provided for that to all school districts based on ADA. And so I have not heard recently that they're talking about providing additional funding, even though we're seeing an uptick again in COVID cases. So that's the first part of your question. And the second is, what are we losing? So, this last year we did hire COVID are they called contact tracers? Yeah. And we paid for that out of some of our federal ESSER dollars. A large part of our ESSER 3 dollars went towards that activity. And what I've heard from the principals is that it was the right decision. And so before we had all of them hired, they were spending a tremendous amount of time trying to be compliant with all that was required with that. And so we are hiring a couple of extra LVNs or health aides. Health aides, I believe it's more than LVNs are health aides, to continue that should we need it. And if we don't need it, we can certainly use them. There's always a need for additional services in that area. We still have ESSER $3 are about the only pot of money that's left, coming through a couple of different accounts. So we primarily saved a portion. A portion of the money had to be used for wellness activities. And so this year we did not budget on purpose a certain portion of that money, saving it for this following year. And that is to support our wellness activities, so social workers that we hired, clinicians that we hired, and then also just the wellness center, social workers. We hired social workers too, and wellness, clerical help that is helping support those those activities, and some of that had to be moved to the general fund. So the ESSER $3 that were left didn't fully support all of the activities we put into place this year. We will spend the next year really evaluating those programs to determine what is most effective. And if it is determined that all of that is needed to provide these services to our students, then we'll find a way to do that. But we will, as the strategic plan is developed and we're aligning all of those goals and activities to our strategic plan will help us align all of that. We'll make decisions from a budget standpoint on things that are most effective.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Sorry, Ted. Thank you.
No, and I think, and Yvonne can correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't cut $3 million worth of stuff away. When that money went, we have some difficult decisions to make over the next couple years as that money goes. We reprioritize some things, but we, like every other district in America, used one-time dollars on ongoing costs. And so we're going to have to make some tough decisions over the next couple years because you can't supplement from the general fund forever. We cut some, but I don't think it was anywhere close to $3 million. So, but we realized savings in other places that allowed us to offset some of that.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That is correct.
That's helpful. Thank you. And again, I apologize for not having that at the tip of my tongue when I read it through the first time.
Okay.
So if there aren't any more questions from the board, I will go ahead and close this hearing. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the third and final hearing for this evening. This is the public hearing to gather pre-map input on trustee areas. So I will go ahead and publicly open up this hearing for agenda item 3C. So we'll welcome back Yvonne.
So I'd like to introduce Shelley Lapkoff with Lapkoff and Gobelay. They are she represents she's the founding member of the company, and she works really closely with her partner, which is Jean Gobelay, who's not here tonight. And so this is their life. This is what they do. They do CVRA, which is why we hired them. They are the premier expertise in this area. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Shelley Lapkoff.
Thank you. Welcome, Shelley.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I don't know if so much CVRA, but we are political redistrictors, and we've been doing political redistricting since 1990. We helped Hartnell our first client in Monterey County was Hartnell College, and we moved them from at-large to by district back in 1990. And since then, it seems like virtually every jurisdiction we've helped. One thing is, I was just looking back, and we haven't had to dissect the area of Carmel Unified. It's usually always a chunk that is within another district. So this is a little new for us to get more micro information about Carmel and to divide your district. This is a little bit about us, just that we've helped virtually all the school districts in Monterey County, district and redistrict, and including the Board of Supervisors and the cities and so forth. Okay, tonight I'm going to go over a variety of topics. The first is just explaining what we're doing, changing the election method. I'm going to show you some maps of your district, talk about the legal requirements, which are substantial when we do these line drawings, and then ask you for input or the public for identifying communities of interest, and then talk about next steps. The purpose of this meeting is really to get information to the demographer on communities of interest, as well as to educate the public on the process. So here we are, changing from at-large to by-district elections. When you are at-large, everybody votes for all trustees. It's sort of like the Senate. Everybody in California will vote for the 2 senators. We are changing to by-district elections, which is kind of like what we do in the House of Representatives, that your Our representative has to live in the area, and only those people living in that area elect that person. So that's what will happen here. You'll have 5 trustee areas, and only the people in that area will elect the representative. When we draw these lines, there are laws that I'm going to go over shortly. And one thing to know is that even if ultimately each trustee will be assigned a trustee area, and you may not live in the trustee area in which you're assigned, but you will continue out your term of office. When your term of office is over, then you can only run from that trustee area in which you live. And these trustee areas will be in effect until the next census, 2030. Okay, so you are doing this because of the California Voting Rights Act, and it is much more lenient than the Federal Voting Rights Act. And essentially, almost all jurisdictions in California have moved to by-district elections because of the CVRA. So you did pass a resolution of intent to change to by-district elections. Then COVID happened, and that got stalled. And more recently, you got a letter from LULAC requesting that, asking about this process. So you have resumed this process, and you're moving forward. So now I'd like to show you a couple maps of your district that might interest you. Here's a satellite view, and what it really shows is there's a lot of unpopulated area in the district. Only a few areas that are populated, or at least for me, that's what I look at, because I'm going to look at your population in order to divide it into 5 areas. And here's a more traditional map of the district, highlighting some of the areas of the key areas: Carmel by the Sea, Carmel Valley Village, Del Monte Forest. And this map shows the population distribution. Each of these dots is proportional to the size of the population. So you can see this vast area that's unpopulated in your district. So we'll be dividing the populated areas and putting more attention on those areas. And this is a zoomed in map of that population distribution, just to give you a sense. These data are by census block, and the blocks are what are the building blocks for drawing the lines. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but you can imagine that we're going to aggregate these different dots into equal size districts. So now I'd like to go over the legal requirements, mainly the federal legal requirements. So the first and the most important one that ultimately will affect you is the population equality. You need roughly equal populations in each trustee area. And second is the Voting Rights Act, and I'll go over that in a minute, and then the state education code. But let's look at the population equality. You only have 22,971 people in your district, and that is small for doing this process. And what that means, well, first of all, we're shooting for 4,594 people per trustee area. But from my perspective, the hard part is that the difference between the smallest and largest district can only be 459 people. So we have that amount of play between the smallest and largest, and that is not a lot of people to be trying to make nice boundaries. So it's just challenging. So we will try and use roads and identifiable features when we draw lines, but it is the census block. Some of them, you saw those big dots, so sometimes they're large and we can't really divide a census block. So This will make perhaps more sense when we actually get to the maps that we draw, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is the big constraint in this process. And then the Federal Voting Rights Act talks about how to treat minority populations. And this actually is not going to be, I don't think, an issue for you. We've looked at the minority populations, and you just don't have a large enough concentration of minorities, and they're not concentrated. First of all, there aren't that many in the district, and then they're not concentrated. If they were concentrated, like in this this slide, basically what you don't want to do is you don't want to divide or crack the minority districts, and you don't want to overly concentrate them. So you have no chance of over-concentrating the minorities. Like that would be if, like in the Salinas area, you might overly concentrate the Hispanic population, and that would reduce their influence. But anyway, what we're going to look for, and I have a slide later of the minority population, is there concentrations of minorities? And if so, we want to keep them together so that they have the most political power as we can give them. So that's, and so ideally you would keep minority voters in a single trustee area, if you could. The other federal requirement was a court case, Shaw v. Reno in 1993. We, as well as other demographers, were doing everything we could to make the minority populations, give them as much political power as possible. And it sometimes resulted in really oddly shaped districts. And this slide shows, if you look where it says 12 in the arrow, that little red area, that's a district. And they combined all the African American populations alongside the freeway. So this got brought to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, this is not appropriate. This is too much. They didn't tell us how much is too much, or other than to say, like, just, you know it when you see it. So we are to use our discretion. But again, I think this is not going to be relevant because your minority populations are so small. When we present the plans to you at the third public meeting, we'll be doing that, we're going to give you a set of information about the minority population. And there are 5 measures of the power of minorities to elect representatives of their choice. And none of them are ideal measures. So one is the total population. For example, what % of Hispanics are in the total population in your district? And that turns out to be 10%. So total population is one measure. Another is the voting age population. Definitely more accurate for trying to assess the voting power of a minority group. Then, especially relevant for the Hispanic population, are they citizens? Because if you're not citizens, you can't vote. So citizens of voting age is the third most important, or the third way we look at the political power. And this is what the courts use to decide if a minority group has a claim. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. But it's called CVAP, or Citizens of Voting Age, and that's what the courts use. And then we have, from the Monterey County Register of Voters, we have registered voters and actual voters. And we don't, when you go to register to vote, you're not asked what your ethnicity is. So we don't exactly know that. But we can look at the last name of the voters. They do have the last name of the voter. And so we can evaluate whether they have a Spanish name or an Asian name. So with that, we have some idea of the Hispanic and the Asian populations. And it's not great, especially for women who may marry and then lose their ethnicity, either a false positive or a false negative, depending on, like if a Hispanic woman marries a non-Hispanic man, we're going to lose her as a Hispanic. and vice versa. So none of these are great measures, but this is the only data that we have to evaluate the political power of a minority group. And this is what these data show for your district, for Carmel Unified. So let's look at the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic column. So 10% of the total population is Hispanic. 8% of the 18 plus population is Hispanic. 7% are citizens of voting age, or a better way of saying that, citizens of voting age. Of those citizens of voting age, 7% are Hispanic. Registered and actual voters, only 5% with Spanish surnames. Asians also are a minority population that's protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And you see that you have 6% total population, 5% of the 18 plus population, and 3% of CVAP and the registered and actual voters. So these are tiny percentages. Okay, and then here is a map that shows the population. The size of the population is the size of the circle. And then the color shows you what ethnicity the population is. So green is whites, non-Hispanic whites. Navy is the Hispanic population. Light blue are the Asians. So the Asians are somewhat concentrated, but really it's just not going to be possible to consolidate either the Hispanics or the Asians into a single trustee area. But we will try, and we will present these statistics to you when we have the plans. Okay, so those were the federal requirements. Here's the state law, and the state law is not a requirement, they're just suggestions. And they say to give consideration to the following factors: topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, and a separate one, communities of interest. Now, this has not been updated for many decades. It's been like this since we've been doing it since 1990. But what has changed is, you may recall that California passed a proposition, and we now do our redistricting with our state redistricting with a committee. And that committee, a citizens committee, randomly chosen, and they take hours and hours of testimony on communities of interest. And that has given a lot of attention to communities of interest and using them to do the redistricting process. So I'm going to ask you, and this is also part of the CVRA, communities of interest. The CVRA wants us to get testimony, like the commission did, our state commission, on communities of interest. So we will ask the public, and often there's very little public comment, but so the board, it's helpful if we can get from you communities of interest as we draw the lines. So here are some examples of communities of interest. Probably the most common are recognized neighborhoods. And that would be something that I would not have personal information on, but you all would. Cities and unincorporated communities. So clearly Carmel Village, Carmel Valley Village, Del Monte Forest would be the three unincorporated or communities. Cities or unincorporated communities. And then areas with similar living standards for whatever reason. Similar income levels or education levels. And then one possibility is your school attendance areas. So I've asked, I don't have that, but maybe by the next meeting, you might want to use your elementary attendance areas as a building block, or to consider that. And any other ideas that you all may have, but I'm imagining it will be recognized neighborhoods. And it may be more obvious what to tell me once you see some maps. And you can say, oh, no, this is dividing this community. So this is the question to the board and to the public. What is your community of interest? Some people have asked, how do we actually go about doing this process? And so we have indicated how we draw the maps. And so we have GIS, computer mapping software. And as I mentioned earlier, we have data by census block. And we can, with a mouse, like aggregate or click, and aggregate these census blocks to form districts. And it's very convenient. Back in 1990, we didn't have such good software. We were doing it by hand. We first look at concentrations of protected groups, like your Hispanics and the Asian population, and make sure we don't divide them. And can we put them in one district? We consider communities of interest that have been identified in this meeting and the next meeting. We consider the cities or the what's called census designated places, like the Village or Del Monte Forest. We try to use major streets. If we use major streets, I feel like the public accepts the plan better. They don't feel like it's gerrymandered if we have to go through a neighborhood. I'm concerned because we have so little deviation, we may have to go through and divide neighborhoods, but we want to do that as little as possible. And usually when you use major streets, that helps not divide an area. Compactness is another aspect. We don't want to jump over a community if we don't have to. So to the extent we can consolidate areas, we want to do that. And then if possible, or if reasonable, we can try to keep incumbents in separate trustee areas. That also is going to be challenging in your case too, in this board, because of the location of your addresses are close together. You live close together. So just to now turn to the CVRA requirements, 2 pre-map meetings to gather information on communities of interest and make sure the public knows what's going on. Then 3 post-map public meetings where I will present a map, or several maps. You give me feedback on those maps. The public can give feedback on the maps either at the meetings or online. They can submit suggestions, and those are very helpful, and so that we can revise the maps as needed. If you want, we can actually do live mapping. It's easier if we can zoom in my assistant, but I can also do it where I have the computer showing on the screen, and I can actually use the mapping program, and we can adjust lines if you have ideas and want to do it on the fly like that. The draft maps must be provided at least 7 days before the first post-map meeting. And you need, before you actually vote on a map, it has to be aired publicly for at least 7 days. So we can't do this live mapping at the last minute. We can do it on the 5th meeting, but then you'll need a 6th meeting before you can adopt it. Okay, and here is the schedule that I believe the board and the staff has worked out. So our next meeting will be in 2 weeks, and then we have a big break, and I'm going to try and get you some maps to look at in early July. So there'll be plenty of time for people to look at the maps and make comments on it, but then we'll start the maps after after school starts. So August 17th will be the first post-map meeting. And this will be ready for the 2024 election for trustees. So that's our schedule. And then the next slide, I really shouldn't say next steps. It should just say public outreach. And the reason is because all these steps have already been taken. You have excellent communications staff member, Jessica Hull, and she has already pretty much done all of these things, and she's shaking her head. So there's been a lot of it. The website's up, and it's been publicized. And with that is the conclusion of the formal presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley. Really good information in great detail. Thank you for that. Before I turn it over to the board, do any of our audience members have any questions? If so, please make your way to the podium. Mr. Schreier.
That was an excellent presentation. I teach this stuff to my human geography students as freshmen, my senior government students, and also at Monterey College of Law. So you really know what you're talking about. And as I look at it, I think to myself, this is not really a district that is a school district that's crying out for this. And because it is optional, and I should say, I've been long a supporter of this, but when I see the data and I see the concentration of populations, I don't think there's a judge in this country that would look at this district and say, oh, you're disenfranchising communities. We don't have enough diversity, and the diversity we have is evenly distributed. I think if you're talking about opening up a can of worms, start drawing lines through neighborhoods and telling the members of this community, you get one vote for one board member. So you don't have to do this. I understand there was a demand letter from LULAC. And like I said, until I saw this, I was a believer this had to happen. But as long as it's still optional, I think it's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve.
Thank you, Bill. Sure.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Bill, and I talked with the demographers, I don't know, several months ago about, let me see the data. I think the issue we have is when you receive a demand letter, there is not an entity in the state of California that has won that lawsuit. Every single entity that has tried to fight it has lost. And so I think that's why nearly everybody has done it. And I think the most prominent, I think down in Southern California, I mean, they're in the millions of dollars in legal fees to fight it. The people who are fighting it. So I don't know that I would consider it optional, just because everybody loses when they fight that. And that's why, when you get that demand letter, pretty much everybody just implements, whether the data says we have a problem or not. I think all we would do is fight it and spend a lot of money that could be in our classrooms and lose and be ordered to do it anyways, is my assumption.
All right. I actually had a similar question, but we'll hold it. So go ahead, Anne Marie. We'll start with you with any questions for Shelley.
Hi, I've been studying this diversity issue and looking at it for quite some time throughout my master's degree. And when I was getting my credential, out of San Jose, they're like, you don't have any diversity. You don't have any. And I'm like, but we have got socioeconomic diversity up the wazoo here. And I'm wondering if that's going to be taken into consideration as not, as a minority group. Is that going to be taken into consideration, or is it just looking at race, ethnicity, and taken into consideration? I think that's my biggest question that I have.
Yeah, so we can take into account whatever we want. What I went over was what we were required to take into account. It is often the case that you want to put people, socioeconomically disadvantaged people together too. The problem is we don't have great data on that. We have the American Community Survey. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the error margins are horrendous, and it's just not really good data. But you locally probably know where the lower socioeconomic areas are, or high, very high. So, we can do that. And what I will do is I will get you the ACS data. We'll look at that by tract, census tract. But it's, I just warn you, it's like not really great data. You would have a better sense here of that.
Well, you were going to be looking at, we were going to have input into what communities we thought were of interest anyway. So
Mhm.
I think that that is, should be taken care of at that point in time. Thank
Mhm.
you.
So Bill asked my question. It seems that more than half of a voting block area, which is around 2,200 voters,
Mhm.
would still not take up our two, very diverse populations, specifically Big Sur and Kashawa. So you would not only be drawing that area together when those families do not know each other at all. And I see that as a disadvantage for them coming together as a community. So I guess my question is for these trustee areas, if you draw a line between Big Sur and Kashawa as a trustee area, it then will go into the more populated areas to make it that 4,500 number. Is that correct? If I'm understanding this correctly?
Yes, and I'm not quite sure where Kishawa is, so
Okay.
I apologize for that. I was trying
So-
to find it.
My question, piggybacking on Bill's, is does it make sense? I mean, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. It sounds like it might be something we don't have a choice on, but so that was that's kind of a concern, because would they combine two areas that are completely unrelated and have similar but very different needs and very different communities that don't know one another? So
Well, we may not put them together then. Where is Chikawa? Is that
Kashawa,
near?
it's way out Carmel Valley Road. It's about an hour from here.
Okay.
Carmel
Yeah.
Valley Road.
I mean, it's not near Big Sur?
No.
Okay,
Two
so then
opposite directions.
There
they,
are two outlying areas.
yeah, well, then they may not be in the same trustee area.
Relatively speaking, they are closer together than either one of them is
As
to
the
Carmel.
As the crow flies, yeah.
Can
As the
I-
crow flies.
Can I ask Tessa's question a different way? And I don't want to hijack your next question, but do you, as a demographer, piggybacking on both what Bill and Tess said, do you ever make the recommendation to a district that districting just is not feasible, or will you, no matter what, make the districting work?
We will make the districting work. I have seen the history on the lawsuits, and no one has won, and a lot of people have good things. Like, Gonzales is having to redistrict. That is even more ridiculous. They are like 98% Hispanic. Like, it's crazy. So right now, the top tier, like most of California transitioned because of this. And now people are going after the remainder, which you weren't targeted because it didn't make sense. Yeah. And I don't know that LULAC is looking for that, because we know the people there. But anyway, they believe, well, I do want to say one thing that I forgot to say in the thing. It's not just to consolidate or concentrate the minority groups. It does make it easier for a minority candidate or a lower income person to run. And that's one of the big reasons they're pushing for that. So right now, I don't know your other two board members. I don't know if you have a Hispanic or an Asian on your board, but it might be easier to have one. Like someone might run. I don't know if you've had candidates that were Hispanic or Asian, but it might make it easier to do that. So that is, and the law, I think the CVRA even mentioned that, but I don't know where that idea came from, but that is commonly cited. So there's that. But the main thing is, it doesn't make sense to fight it, because it's just tens of millions of dollars down the drain for nothing. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Tess. Go ahead. Sorry.
Good. That was good. I'm done. Thank you. That was helpful.
No, I was just adding, I think that as a board that I know,
Your mic.
I'm probably the closest thing that, comes to being Hispanic, having grandparents that were first generation Americans, because my family's been in California since 1769, but they were Mexican citizens. So, but that's, really pushing it, really pushing it.
Yeah. Well, that you know, just as an academic, we are looking for people like you because the whole question is how fast Hispanics assimilate. So you're an example of assimilation by the third generation. Yeah.
And I just had two quick questions. One regarding our schedule that you went through.
Yeah.
Since we were given this demand letter from LULAC, do we have to provide LULAC with this schedule in response to the demand letter so they know that we're going through all the paces and we actually have all of this planned?
Well, I would think you want them to know.
Yeah,
this,
exactly.
And
That's
maybe
what I was
Jessica
asking.
sent them that information. I don't know. And this will be posted on your web. It's already, is the presentation posted on the website in the redistricting area?
Okay,
But they should be notified, yes.
Yeah, and I
On
did.
the
I
sch-
responded to that demand letter, and they know we're moving forward.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. And then my last question regarding the minority voters. And you mentioned keeping them all together, but you had a picture further up in the presentation where you had two voting blocks with minority population. So do you try and put minority voters in each voting block, or do you try and put them all into one if you can?
Well, we want to consolidate them. The idea is to have at least 50% CVAP. And we couldn't do that if we tried. Even if we were back in the 90s and trying to cherry pick blocks, we couldn't do that.
Okay.
So, it's, so there's no federal requirement to do that. And there's no California Voting Rights Act to do that. The California Voting Rights Act only says you have to make districts, does not say how to make them.
Okay, that was
Whereas
my
the
question.
federal
Yes.
government says how to make them.
Okay.
But given that you don't meet that 50% CVAP, the courts would not say so we're free to draw them however it makes sense
Okay,
to draw them.
great. Thank you.
But
And
could
just drawing them will appease the demand letter from LULAC.
Yeah, and could someone, can I approach that? Just see where Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, Kashawa.
It's not on there, actually.
If you
No.
go back to one of your
Oh.
earlier overviews, your topography.
It was in one of the first slides.
The one that showed the Ventana Wilderness.
Yes.
It's the one with all
Keep
the
going,
greenbelt
yeah.
area in it.
What slide is that?
It's slide 7, Poncho.
Oh, it is likely that, as we draw lines, that whole
Exactly.
area.
So
would
this
be in one
area
chunk here.
and this area they're 25 miles apart. 3 days hiking. And there's no road, other than a hiking
Well, it's
trail.
national
3 days
forest,
hiking going across the national forest to get from one to the other. But then each one of these is closer to this than it is to Cornell.
So, another interesting thing is that the village equals one trustee area, just FYI. So it doesn't have to be a trustee area, but it is equal to one.
Okay. I think we had one more comment from Mr. Schreier in the back.
A question. If you start.
No one at home will be able to hear you.
Got it. Sorry. If you start knitting together districts based on ethnicity, doesn't that run afoul of Shaw versus Reno? How are you going to, because, we just talked about what a litigious district we're in. Somebody doesn't like it, and they challenge it on those grounds. How do you explain that?
The idea is that even though we knit together the minority populations, if we can, we do it in such a way that it's compact. Compact, not necessarily small, but you're not jumping over a community is the actual definition of compactness in this case. And so we're going to try and make trustee areas that will make sense to people while we're putting together the minority populations. So we're not going to be cherry picking. We're going to do what makes as much sense as we can with this 459 person deviation constraint.
All right.
So-
Thank you so much, Shelley. We appreciate the presentation and we'll look forward to your future presentations. And I will officially go ahead and close this hearing. And that will end our action, discussion, and information items section of the agenda, and we'll move on to closed session. Before adjourning to closed, I'll go ahead and I'll identify our closed session items. There are two. Closed session agenda item A is conference with legal, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, subdivision D2. This is one case. And our standing closed session agenda item, this is public employee performance evaluation pursuant to Government Code 54957 regarding the superintendent. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn the public portion of this meeting and go into closed. And we will return shortly. Thank you. No, I'll just report out. Okay, in closed session, the board took the following action for closed session agenda item A, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, subdivision D2. The board voted unanimously to enter a settlement agreement, including prospective educational services in the amount of $41,600 in exchange for release and waiver of claims against the district through the end of the 2022-2023 school year. And with that, the meeting this evening is